Yes, great afternoon, Paul, for such significant questions. And as I said, it's certainly a pleasure to be part of this amazing group. I saw a number of colleagues, friends, and those we might not have met before, but definitely one day we shall be meeting, God willing. Yeah, in summary, ZNCC is arguably the oldest business member organization within Zimbabwe, founded in 1894. So you can guess it's beyond 126, 127 years. It's older than that. So certainly I think you can see is Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. It stands for Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. As you know, ZNCC is an abbreviation, but it stands for private sector. In other words, ZNCC is the voice of the private sector. Its interests are to advance growth, protection, and survival of businesses in Zimbabwe, and also looking at some businesses outside Zimbabwe which are Zimbabwean owned. Yeah, I mean, look, when I took over as the CEO of the chamber, which I did slightly more than 5 years ago, I can say I'm 5-year-old as a CEO at ZNCC. And the goals were certainly to create a voice which is credible, a voice which is independent, a voice which is quite credible enough to proffer an alternative when it comes to policy making, and also to represent the interests of private sector in Zimbabwe. A voice which was to be apolitical, but at the same time thriving or using what we call the research-based or evidence-based profiling of solutions. So in a nutshell, that's what ZNCC is all about. And when I came in as the CEO of ZNCC, obviously my goals included, firstly, to make sure that we will take the Chamber of Commerce to its rightful position of being the voice of business, as I hinted to be able to be listened to by the government and its different arms when it comes to policy making. The goals were also to make sure that the organization was to move or to return to profitability. Because if I look back, definitely I think it was in the red. But 2 years after my appointment at the chamber, we managed to create an organization which not only is profitable, but which we believe is also giving value to its members, where you see membership growing in leaps and bounds. We have a constituency or a membership which goes beyond 2,200 in terms of paid up members who pay subscriptions. But if you look at our constituency in terms of how many members are there outside those who are paid up, you will see we go beyond 25,000 members. Yes, I will start with the first period you just mentioned, from 2014 to 2017. I think the context, obviously, which could be familiar with most of the colleagues in the group, is 2014 to 2017 were coming out of the inclusive government, which was consummated, I think, around September 2008. And there was a GNU from 2009, definitely. So from 2014 to 2017, we were coming out of the 2013 elections, obviously, which I believe were quite very divisive, very polarized, given that we had two major political protagonists in the country, coming out of the government of national unity. Then come 2013, one party, obviously the ruling party, prevailing on the elections, which therefore means they were taking over from the policies of GNU, which came with its own challenges. But the 2014 to 2017, I'll call it one of the toughest and obviously unfortunate era for businesses in this country. Why? While we're still smarting from the 2008 confusion or economic malaise or confusion, yes, we had a period of, can I say, comfort. The GNU period when we started using multi-currency, which we normally call dollarization. We saw stability in the economy, with the economy generally growing. Although if you see the level of growth in the economy in 2009 up to 14, it was generally one cylinder which was firing in the economy, which is the mining sector, which was growing leaps and bounds. But other sectors, it was more to do with stability, given that we're coming from a very low base. So the growth numbers, if they were between 7 to 12%, you see it was more of trying to come back to life from the very ups the economy had entered in prior to 2009, let me call it. So 2014 to 2017, in a nutshell, it was a period of confusion, because that's the period when we lost it when it comes to the dollarized economy. The Zim dollar, or the local US dollar, was created. I think you saw how the local, or the RTGS, eclipsed the neutral balances in the economy, in the process pushing the US dollar out of the economy. What was considered or claimed to be US dollar in banks, the more people were getting exposed to it, the more they realized it was no longer US dollar. So it was a tough period because cash queue started again. We also managed to experience monetary instability where you could not make decisions. Inflation was on its way up again. And the major reason for inflation was certainly money supply growth, nothing else. As we continued printing money without realizing that, or realizing that austerity was no longer sustainable. So in failing to be austere, government then ended the printing machine where the local US dollars were printed. And that impacted negatively on business. Then if you look at 2018, I think with the coming in of the new dispensation, hope, expectations, and all. I think one thing, as a non-political actor, I think one thing I can take away is the commitment of the present government to see an economic turnaround. But I believe then we will try to interrogate on why some of the areas are still lacking and what could be the challenges. But I'm quite sure, as an individual, not representing even the chamber or any institution I'm associated with, I'm sure if I compare the government of 2018 to date, the 2018 administration, which is still running up to 2023, the commitment, energy, and appetite to also listen, especially to private sector submissions, is very high, which will also make me challenge experts, be it from business member organizations, professional bodies, to somehow come up with a solid position to present to government without necessarily being analysts who are armchair or who are not on the coffers or maybe who are not very much active in providing solutions. So 2018 to date, I think there is room for civil society to intervene and bring their issues on the table for this government to listen to. But as I said, I think as we communicate, I'll also raise issues which possibly are of concern in terms of culture of policy making even today in the country. Yeah, in terms of challenges business are facing, there are a plethora of challenges. But I think what's more important is to understand that challenges are everywhere. Every part of the world has got its own challenges. But coming back home, the challenges obviously in Zimbabwe, especially to do with business, one, it had been the issue of the monetary regime. In other words, you could not trust a monetary policy from the country because what you see is not what you would get. Next time they will be preaching of confidence. Then after that, you will see policies to usurp confidence being the order of the day. Secondly, what I call policy uncertainty, people take it for granted. It's a major risk on its own way. It's a cost for business on its own because you can't decide when you are not sure for how long we'll continue in this dispensation where currency is still both the US dollar and the Zimbabwe dollar. What is the government position regarding the currency outlook? Then third, I think perception, both international and domestic. We have a serious challenge there. You are a businessman, you want to start an enterprise. I think some of you agree from outside Zimbabwe. There are people who believe Zimbabwe is not a normal environment up to now. You can't do business in Zimbabwe. To some extent, some people even confuse Zimbabwe to think it's closer to failed states like your Somalia, but which is far from the reality. So perception is a reality as we push even to agree terms, deals with countries outside or companies outside Zimbabwe. You see their level of trust for Zimbabwean enterprise is very low, given that they are still consuming the yesteryear risks, which had been making headlines every day for this country. So it's a serious issue. Then the other challenges, obviously, which we seem to take for granted or only walk up to them, to talk about them when they hit on us. Issues to do with utilities, energy, water, and the soft infrastructure, which is the legal environment, which encompasses constitutionalism. To what extent do we adhere to the constitution of the land? To what kind of policies do we have? How do we implement them? How pro-business they are? So I'm talking about energy, water, and the legal environment. These three, I consider them the pillars to making it possible for business to prosper in Zimbabwe, and they seriously need attention. People thought maybe energy is no longer an issue until we're having power outages now. But yes, Chamber of Commerce, we always have been clamoring for a policy shift where we'll see a reliable energy supply. We would say this 2 months ago, 1 year ago, even when the power outages were not this grinding like we see. And we still believe there's a serious risk when it comes to power generation in the country, and it's impacting on businesses. Yeah, I think your question on the $1 billion from the RBZ auction for the purpose of increasing production is a very welcome question. But also, if you juxtapose that question with maybe the argument of also about 1.7 billion sitting on banks, which can be deployed to businesses maybe as advances in all. So I wanted to contextualize first, so that for starters, we need to have a picture of what 1 billion means and what is potentially possible. What's more we can add to the 1 billion you are talking about. As private sector, in particular ZNCC, when the auction came, we were very confident. We were so sure that as much as obviously on paper it looked necessary, but it was never going to be a sufficient tool to deal with the challenges bedeviling in Zimbabwe. Firstly, because the mode of the auction itself somehow, in its own way, is creating distortions. If you have an auction which is servicing an average of 1,300 companies reliably every week, 1,300 companies, keyword reliably every week, becoming a platform to be used for exchange rate determination, I think that can then somehow answer your question on the 1 billion you are pushing. For any business, a rational business person in Zimbabwe who has got access to Forex at 85, I think it's like a festivity on its own way. If I get 85, if I get US dollar at 85, surely why should I risk and deploy it into the economy when I'm not sure tomorrow whether I will get it at 85, given the model we are using to set the 85. Secondly, when you know very well as a rational person that the demand for Forex in the economy you're operating as a business is pegging the same Forex at 160. So we can argue and try to paint pictures, throw words like patriotic, but the keyword should be a rational business. The biggest challenge of the auction today, maybe it's its failure to price all risks, fundamentals, to come up with what we call a reliable market reflective exchange rate. So as long as businesses are getting it at that rate, you might not see the impact in terms of job creation. Because as a business, when you get it at 85, like I'm saying, you're seeing it as a bonus. And what do? You deploy it, or you try to generate more. And no business can generate you more than to sell that Forex, maybe in the underhand or black market. So that is a challenge in its own way. The debate should never be about 1 billion. The debate should be about how do we have an exchange rate which is market reflective. Once you get an exchange rate which is market reflective, no one will care even about what is coming out of the auction, because even a small enterprise, Kona Chinoi and Kwame Nkrumah or down there, will be able to release money at a good rate or an acceptable rate. And no one will wait for the 1 billion you are talking about from the Reserve Bank. Then you are talking about goods on the shelf. Yes, I heard the debate. The arguments have been peddled time and again. We appreciate it's our members who are pushing these products on the shelves. But it's very important to also put it into perspective that the argument should never be about number of products on the shelves. If you try to go further and interrogate the value of products on the shelves, maybe you'll see it's still quite a disappointing statistic. Because what worries us, or what is of interest to the economy, is not necessarily the number of products on the shelves, but is the value of products on the shelf. You can have so many products on the shelf of low value, which means your affinity to import remains high, which means your current account will still remain under pressure. So at the moment, we still have a lot of work to do. Why? Because those products which we have on the shelves as business, they are still from the lower value chain of production. In other words, they are dominantly closer to the primary goods, of which the import bill of Zimbabwe, if you were to profile it, you will see up the value chain is where there's a gap. So it's the value of products on the shelf which should matter to us more than the volume. Although volume is showing somehow there's movement, but volume of low value products might not be an indicator of anything in an economy. Yeah, so this argument of looking at even US economy versus Zim is the fundamentals. You know, when you push 1 billion into a US economy, it's 1 billion. When you push 1 billion US dollar money into Zim economy, it has different interpretations depending on whether you're privileged to access it at 85 to an extreme of 160, 170, which we are talking about today. What is causing these distortions? It's beyond fundamentals. Like any economy, you have speculators, you have arbitrageurs, you've got, all these kind of players will always be there. So for us to move forward as a nation and to feel the impact of money, including the 1 billion you're talking of, including the SDR, I think you know about the IMF figure, which is almost also $1 billion. Those figures will amount to nothing as long as the market is convinced that that US dollar which is coming to us is wrongly priced. You will have concentration risk of it ending up in the hands of very few people. So we need to deal with exchange rate first before we interpret figures. Why 1.7 billion in banks is not being deployed? Banks are holding into that money because they know if they give you that money at an official exchange rate recognized by their regulator, who is Central Bank, they will bend their fingers. So what do? They hold on to that money waiting for tomorrow, hoping that somehow a new way of determining exchange rate will come. They will never tell anyone that. They will never speak about it. But their wait and see attitude will tell you a story, which even I believe the Central Bank governor is fully aware of. So we have to settle the distortions, handle them, solve them. Then you can see the figures they are peddling will make an impact on this economy. I think you know the issue of funds and their use. It's a regulatory issue. It's an NCC. Certainly, we can be very much interested in the private affairs of companies. Once they are allocated funds, our belief is the funds are being used to intended use. We believe these are professional businesses. However, let me continue emphasizing to you that the environment I spoke about, it can promote funds abuse. I think as an economist, you appreciate if there is room for arbitrage, how a rational player can behave. So we need to look back even from the time of Gideon Gono as a governor of the central bank. I think you had seen a number of lists of people who are externalizing funds, lists of people who are doing so and so errands. We should have learned from that past that the debate should never be about funds abuse. Because when you start seeing funds being abused normally, it's because you have commodified those funds. They are now something you can trade. The same as when you hear Zimbra saying, if you buy your stuff in US dollar, you should remit your tax in US dollar. It's a sign that they also have a belief that the exchange rate is not reflective. But honestly, if the exchange rate was representative of the facts on the ground, who care whether you pay your tax using a local currency or a US dollar? That's just a reflection. So same applies to funds abuse. You know, the moral hazard issue. You need to be thorough. In fact, the auctions role should not primarily be into allocating funds. It should be more of a, can I call it, an exchange rate determination or a price discovery mechanism, which will allow then for the market to have distribution of funds from banks and all. The challenge we have is when the regulator is the one which is dispensing funds. If there's a challenge with the culture of dispensing funds, who is going to regulate the regulator to say, oh, central bank, look, this is not the way to do? In fact, what is happening, it should be the banks dispensing funds, and then central bank will come in as a regulator and put order in the sector. But unfortunately, it is the policeman himself who is breaking somehow the laws of the game, can I call it? So the issue of exposing funds externalization, I think Exchange Control Division of Central Bank, it has a clear role. Financial Intelligence Unit, it has a clear role. As ourselves as ZNCC, obviously, we are a law-abiding institution. We will hope, with the assistance of those enabled organizations, to adhere to law. Then on investment on the domestic markets, I think it depends on how someone looks at it. Because if you look at for example, the diaspora remittances in this economy, the numbers are quite very exciting. Which means confidence is there. People can push their money for their families. It can be maybe for survival, but still money is coming. Then on ZNC, I think there's then nothing anomaly about not experiencing a bullish behavior on the market here. Where there's uncertainty, a stock market generally is a barometer of economic performance. So it will actually be unusual if you start seeing bull runs in an economy where you know very well that most fundamentals are facing southwards, except some green shoots. I think the fallacy of composition, where in a desert of 50 cows and only 10 are healthy, you can choose to take those 10 and make noise about them and talk about how healthy cows are, isn't it? But generally speaking, the economy still needs a push-up. A number of fundamentals are still not in shape. And as ZNCC, our duty is not to criticize even the government, but to work towards finding a solution to it. So the ZNC performance is certainly reflective of fundamentals of how the economy is performing. Even what you call the blue chip counters, if you try to just do a close analysis of those stocks, you will certainly see that there is certainly nothing blue chip about them when you were to make comparisons, even within the region, given the fundamentals Zimbabwe has versus other countries in the region. Then on your last question regarding the exchange rates, we do have confidence. I think the issue of monetary policy, it's a statutory thing. There's an RBZ Act which already exists, and it has a mandate to make sure the monetary policy comes up with it. So it's not ZNC's brief either to have or not have confidence. We have to have confidence in the monetary policy, but the question to us is how do we can make it more effective? Obviously, we don't need a knee-jerk reaction or a culture where monetary policies are set to react to market developments more than to set agenda for the next 5-10 years. That's our biggest problem here. We set policies to react, to correct. Unfortunately, you know how stubborn the vicious cycle of distortions can continue wide and far. We believe the best way to have a monetary policy which is effective, firstly, like we said, is when we start appreciating, respecting and upholding the market forces. The moment you doubt market forces and you want to create a community of unique market forces you believe are more reflective, that's the biggest challenge. I think we have a lot of corporate tombstones in this country, companies which had lost lives, either through price controls, interest rate policies, which we call financial repression. You put interest rates and you say you can't go beyond this. And now the exchange rate itself, I tell you, 2 years from now, we will reflect back and agree to say, but we spoke about why we needed to correct this. Because at the moment, an average exporter in the country will not be happy to sell his money he's generating at 85 when he knows he can get it at 160. So, if the exchange rate cannot correct those distortions, if an exchange rate cannot speak into development economics, how to create jobs, if an exchange rate or if a monetary policy cannot come to the fore without independence, then it becomes a problem. We need to see a strong central bank where independence is upheld, be it independence in terms of instruments or goals of a central bank. It's very important, and That's what brings credibility. You don't want a case where you feel a central bank could not act on this one because it's a slippery slope. Once the market feels there is that feeling, I tell you, no amount of preaching, even from those at the home of central bank, will turn around or change the perception of market players. I personally think we already have a too big central bank in this economy. So with a too big central bank, naturally, I don't think we will lose sleep over the monetary policy committee. In fact, its role is so limited in this economy. And if you look at what they've been spending much of their time on, possibly some are peripheral issues, but the monetary policy committee is the one which should be firstly reviewing market developments in terms of banking. We spoke about 1.7 billion sitting on banks, not willing to dispense it. Why? We should have a well thought out paper on what is triggering that lack of appetite to lend by banks. Secondly, the interest rate policy is very quiet. Regardless, we could have different accommodation rates coming up in this, but if you look generally, the interest rate policy in the nation is not well defined, and by that, I can assure you that you can't control inflation in the outlook. Inflation is more dangerous in the outlook. It's expected inflation which worries a player in the economy more than the current inflation you talk of. So if interest rates are not set to deal with that, it's a problem on its own way. So I personally don't look at a monetary policy committee and expect much. Why? Because it's just a committee. Look, what you need is a robust, independent central bank. Once such a structure is in existence, you will see committees like the monetary policy committee will just complement the role of the central bank, which we refer to. The representation, or it's not something we should worry about, because you can still have a well represented, according to some people, monetary policy committee, but have weaker characters or personalities in the committee. So it's not in representation, it's in just adhering to the rules, guidelines of RBZ Act of what a monetary policy should do. Yeah, if you look at the growth numbers for 2020, I think generally you look at World Bank numbers, IMF, generally I think you can look at a number of -6%. So a 7.8% GDP growth as envisaged by government, it is achievable. I don't doubt that is possible. What we can only doubt maybe is when it's 7.8% coming from a low base of -6% for 2020. You can agree with me that it's easy to have some bit of growth when you're coming from a low base, but that quality of growth might not mean much. So yes, it is achievable, but maybe the worry will be where cylinders are not firing, only one or two. I spoke about 2009 to 2013, where growth was driven dominantly by the mining sector, growing in leaps and bounds, while these other sectors were stagnant but just stabilizing. So it's the quality of growth which matters. 7.8% is achievable, but given where we are coming from, it's too low, the number. Also, given the government vision 2030 of an upper middle income economy, I think it's very difficult to then achieve that. It's not many years from now. So yes, 7.8%, we don't think we have a challenge with that. What we have a challenge with is, will it be spread, or it will be growth driven by just a few sectors, your agriculture, maybe your mining, when the commodity prices are somehow fair to us. That's what I can see on the GDP numbers. I really don't know. If you really focus, for example, on the banking sector and its support to agriculture, it's not true. I think it's a very strong misconception that banks don't support agriculture. If you were to look at most books of banks, even looking at the monetary policy and allocation of advances in the economy, you see the agriculture sector is one of the most supported sectors in this economy, even by banks. A number of banks I can list have a skewness or bias to the agriculture sector. So certainly we can't say they don't support agriculture. They do. In terms of interest rates, I think they are quite very unfriendly for businesses. Different arguments are paid with that because inflation rate is northwards of 50%. So given our interest rates are already negative, real interest rates is friendly. I don't think it follows. We have a unique market. I think it's a US dollar, Zim dollar market. But what I can say to you is the interest rates themselves, as much as they are high, they are not the major threat or a challenge for businesses. Actually, the tenure of facilities is more unfriendly than the interest rates because it's mostly short-termistic loans, 3 months, at most 1 year. So that alone can tell you that there's no patient capital in the economy. We need that amount. We need that money where you can plan, where you can use it for investments, and then try to make a comeback. Yeah, look, we engage with all the responsible ministries, with His Excellency. Yeah, what I can assure you is we have meetings time and again with the president of the land. And I tell you, to me, he is a listening man because we also have got police issues, including even the lockdown measures we had been pushing for, which we had seen the response positive. What we had learned as businesses is not all things we forward even to the president or to ministers, which they will take on board. Why? Because I think business, our story is clear. We want to maximize profits. But if it's government or politicians, there's a lot they want to consider also. So there's nothing unusual or amiss in case we make our submissions and they are not taken as they are. But what I can safely and soundly inform you is the minister responsible for industry and commerce, Honorable Dr. Nzenza, the Minister of Finance, Professor Mtuli, His Excellency himself. He knows our issues. We engage regularly to the extent that in less than a month or so we'll be engaging on a ZNCC platform. So I can assure you our grievances or our issues, we take them on board. We take them to the leadership. Okay. What an interesting question there. I think we do work together well, especially with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, because it's the mother ministry to us. I think for the Small and Medium Enterprise Ministry under Minister Stembiso Nyoni, there's the associations under that, like your Small Medium Enterprises, Chamber of SMEs in the country. But the factor is we work together, we are one. A month hardly passes without us sharing notes on issues to do with industry and commerce. We do work together, I can assure you. It's hardly even a week since the last time we engaged on a different subject, which means we meet. I think on SADC, COMESA, I don't know, maybe I will take note of what you are raising. But yes, our membership is there, both in SADC and COMESA. We are there. In fact, ZNCC is in the COMESA Business Council, and it has a board seat representing private sector within the region, within COMESA, and it chairs one of the very key committees under COMESA. So we are quite involved in the region. Very interestingly, you also raised the issue of the gerontocracy or what, 50, 60, 70-year-olds. No, if you look at the ZNCC right now, we have a youthpreneurship desk. A lot of youth, especially youth-owned businesses, they are also within the chamber structures. We look at that, not only youth, but also women. I think if you look back, you appreciate ZNCC is the first organization to have women-owned businesses, or to have a women desk, which is the model then most banks in the economy went on to somehow just take and apply in their different systems. So yes, we have a bias also to both youth and women after recognizing that gap. That was since 2014, 2015, when we made sure we introduced these desks. So, you know, a lot of people are quite young. Maybe ironically, you can even know that maybe the president, the current chairman, board chairman of ZNCC is below 38 in terms of age, and this deputy is also below 39. So I think it's quite reflective of how it looks beyond the age issue. Then on young people, I think, like I mentioned, those young leaders already in the chamber structures, I think we take note. Although we can improve on areas where you think maybe we are lacking regarding the demographics of age, but I think such statistics can tell you we are quite very involved. Then on whether dollarization or continue this way, I think we need to maintain the course. This whole luxury of choosing currency, we don't have it, because the current dispensation is more of a market forces result more than any policy choice or consideration. So at the moment, I think we should be preoccupied with just dealing with the fundamentals and see how they can support a certain currency if one day we are to propel our RTGS currency, obviously, which you and I can agree is under pressure. But the truth of the matter is we need to stay the course. The malt currency where we put the US dollar and the RTGS, it needs to be promoted, it needs to be supported. And we believe this is the way to go. While we are treating it as a KPI of agents, we can't afford to have this dynamic or dispensation for too long, given that it's creating its own uncertainties. The arbitrage opportunities we're talking about, it's a result of these currencies and how they are valued in the market. But in the short term, I think let's stay the course and continue with the current dispensation we are currently having. It's important. It's very important. Well, I think there is a question on whether the best practice from similar countries, that issue. Yeah, I mean, look, we can debate on how independent a central bank can be. I think when time allows, we can go deeper and try to look at independence of central banks. Independence in two contexts. There's what we call the goal independence, and then there's what we call the instruments independence, which we'll talk about maybe when another platform presents itself. But in summary, different countries present different contexts. I don't know about it's what is it? Economics? No, not necessarily. If you go to China and see how their central bank operates, and then maybe you go to UK and try to understand their central bank and how it operates. Most central banks, there's a story to say, let's have a developmental central bank, which advances the interests of the current of the nation or the interest of the government, what that government wants to achieve. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. But I think the common denominator is there should be a perception that a central bank is independent. It's more of a perception, you know. Just like a perception when USA prints money, perception that no, it's backed by something, when it's not necessarily backed by anything. So perception can be reality. So these economics or what we just need is to make sure fundamentals are in shape. Once that happens, I tell you, even these economics you are talking about can be accepted worldwide. There's a new model of managing the economy. But if you try it without being tested or without an evidence-based kind of background, you are getting to pitfalls we have. Then there's a question on why you're advocating for dollarization. I think certainly I'm not advocating for either dollarization or what. I can only advocate maybe for the use of our local currency, but that can only happen at the right time. For now, you can choose between being proud of your local currency at the expense of stability or otherwise. So the debate at this juncture in Zimbabwe is certainly not on currency. Currency debate might be more of a luxury or a cosmetic debate. Because if you go back to 2016-17 and see the boxes which Professor Mtuli, the boxes which Dr. Mangujika promised to tick on the conditions to have our own currency, they are yet to tick even 50% of those boxes. So we need to work. We need to work on that. Dollarization, it can be ideal, it can be uncompetitive, it can be what. But also the argument of competitiveness of a currency, it can't just be thrown. You need to look at a number of factors. For example, if you have an economy which has got a domination of or a dominance of mining, obviously you can't argue on dollarization or not, because you know most of your exports are determined at the international price, not through the currency dynamics. So that's why I said the argument on dollarization also, it will need this time. You see, it will need this time. Yes, but the fact remains, as a nation, we need to work hard in making sure we achieve a stable currency which is convertible on the markets outside Zimbabwe, a currency which can be trusted by its policymakers first, even before it's trusted by the outsiders. Like you heard, I raised number of issues. Your Zimbra, why they insist on need for paying your tax in the currency you trade in. It all points to questions on to what extent we perceive our own currency. So, yes, I think in the medium to long term, we need to work towards having our own currency. It's good. It's good. Ask Venezuela, Malta, and some countries which are dollarization. It's not something you can celebrate. We need to work on that. And I'm sure with the current team at Treasury, at the Central Bank, they are aware of the pitfalls of continuously being in dalliance with the currency mix we are having, because it's not sustainable. It's creating its own confusion. We need to have a monocurrency. And in that monocurrency argument, I think our own local currency should be the best bet. Yeah, I think on your question regarding RBZ selling Forex, I will just regurgitate what I said. The argument should never be about central bank selling currency. Because, look, once you have the regulator in the business of doling out money already, it's a distortion in the economy. That Forex should be, we should be asking questions on bank, CBZ, EcoBank, NMB. They are doling out money to business, but they are doing this. What should central bank do? But if it becomes central bank doing it, like I said, it then brings the issue of who is going to be the regulator. So firstly, I think Reserve Bank's role should be limited. They should not dole out that money. Secondly, they should decentralize the whole interbank market so that the whole exchange rate determination is a market-wide thing, not a Forex auction argument. Because once you limit to a Forex action, you start having these problems of making exchange rate a political tool. And indeed, you should know also that exchange rate is a political tool. In fact, between 1990 and 2000, 45% of African ministers who had tried to devalue their currency had lost their jobs. That can tell you how sensitive the exchange rate issue is. But we don't want a case where Reserve Bank is in the business of doling out Forex. It's not their role. Their role is to create policies which will allow players to release Forex, not for them to do it.